Hello everyone, this is Trevor. Again, it's December 11th, 2019. Today I'm going to discuss Jed McKenna's book, Spiritual Enlightenment, The Damnedest Thing. I just finished it last night, technically very early this morning. But yeah, so I don't know if you watched my previous video on letting go and humbling yourself. But anyways, this is somewhat connected to that, but I'm just going to break down his book, McKenna's book, Spiritual Enlightenment, The Damnedest Thing, into three main points. Discuss some of what I thought about the book, my own experiences, and then some questions that I still have for Jed and things that I just don't understand or still wonder about. So the first thing I will talk about is, let me introduce Jed this way. Okay. So you have a philosopher or theologian, right? They come up to your door, right? They're like, and they're like, excuse me, have a moment of time. Kind of like proselytizing, like, we're here to teach you about Jesus, right? So that is, and then someone's like, no, go away, or you just hide in your room. Let me show you what Jed is like. Hold up. It's going to require some prep for this. Oh, God. You're fake. And that's Jed. Okay, so very top part. Very good acting skills on my part. No. Basically, most philosophers or theologians are those who discuss what Jed talks about, spiritual enlightenment, the damnedest thing. Most philosophers are kind of like, they knock on your door, they're very polite, all of that. Jed, no. Like, he like, if philosophers and most theologians and how they deal with spiritual enlightenment and enlightenment are door knockers, polite. Reading this book, Jed is like driving a car really fast, and he slams into your house, and he gets out of the car. Your house wall's shattered. He gets out of the car. Got some glass and blood. Car's totaled. Maybe the house is gonna be burning to the ground. He says 2 words: "You're fake." And okay, so that's the McKenna. It's the Jed experience. So that's the main difference I want to outline, is that Jed is 1/10 would be a word that is accurate. So the first point of the book, truth and enlightenment, right? Enlightenment being the attainment or the realization, the understanding of truth. So for Jed, throughout a lot of the book, he describes truth as something you cannot positively describe. In that sense, it's something that you can only say what it isn't. So it's negatively defined. So, for example, you can say so you get rid of all the false things in your life. You get rid of all the false things in you, namely the ego and everything attached to it, which turns out to be a lot. And all that remains is truth, according to McKenna. That's his first point. So connected to this, truth then is unspeakable. It's beyond language. It's beyond morality and depiction. It is beyond duality. And in that sense, it is non-dualistic. So I feel like inevitably when describing it in language, you are going to run into paradoxical language. Like, I really recommend, I think I read the Heart Sutra in my last video, but a little part from that is emptiness is form and form is emptiness, and something like emptiness allows for form and form allows for emptiness. So sort of like that paradox, right? That like seeming opposites are actually the same thing. And that's, well, the non-dualism perspective in general, and the sort of truth perspective gets connected to that, and connected this in Truth Enlightenment. Jed doesn't talk about it as explicitly as David Hawking does in Letting Go, about the letting go technique, but Jed does talk about, what is it? Sort of, yeah, this total acceptance of reality. And so for him, there's this step where you have to, or many steps, but once you reach this point where you realize that the ego and everything attached to it, this material world, is all an illusion, is all false. That is the enlightenment. That is the enlightenment moment. So that's the first point. The second point of what he goes into is he says that most spiritual seeking is not intended to, most spiritual seekers do not intend to reach enlightenment or obtain truth. They just want to seek. And you don't have to be conscious of this. I wasn't conscious of this. To be honest, after I finished reading the book, I was like, whoa. And while reading the book, I was like, whoa, because I've probably been a spiritual seeker. Maybe it's only been a few years. Maybe it's been a lot of years. I don't know when exactly it started. But in my own life experience, this is definitely true in that until McKenna and Jed McKenna was just like, in the very beginning, the very first chapter, he's interviewing this, talking with this one girl over maybe his lunch or just at a park or somewhere, and just saying like, what do you want? And she's like, truth, enlightenment. And he's like, what does that mean? And she was like, oneness, unity. And he's like, what does that mean? And so this gets into, I guess I'll skip into the next part, but this connects to McKenna's concept and technique known as spiritual autolysis. Basically, it boils down to answering just question upon question that is layered. Eventually, you just break down all the falseness, and all you are left with is truth, at least according to Jed. So, for example, one question, he really says there's like two questions. He says this one question, though, can lead you to enlightenment. Ask yourself over and over, throughout many situations and just to deeper and deeper levels, who am I? Who am I? Ask yourself that. For example, so I'll do myself. So who am I? Right? I could say I'm Trevor West. I'm a 22-year-old male human. So then the process is saying, well, what do you mean by I? What do you mean by human? What do you mean by 22? What do you mean by male? What do you mean by Trevor West? So I'll start with the name. My name, Trevor West. Is it real? No, it's false. It's made up. It's societally generated. It's within language. There is no Trevor West that it's true. No, it's not. It's just a bunch of gibberish words that make sense in context of the English language. And just historically, people have been called Trevor, and they've had last names of West because that's just a thing. But it's false. So I'm not going to go further into that. You could if you're not convinced. I'm already kind of convinced, and I've done this a lot, so I'm a little burned out on that part. But for example, then you could say, well, what does I mean? What does I refer to? Does it refer to this body? So if I, cut off my arm, am I still I? If I lose all my memories, am I still I? Like what else could you say? Like, what is I? What makes you you? What makes me me? You could say, oh, it's what we like. I like running. I like doing videos like this, reflecting. I like meditating. I like learning new things. I like playing certain instruments. I like blah, blah, blah. You go on. But it analyzes the root of those things. And this might be a bit of a segue, but I think in my last video I talked about how I microfractured my right ankle, right? So during that time, I obviously wasn't able to run. And then once I was able to recover, I was already kind of wondering where my goals with running were. But after reading McKenna's book, it was even further. I was like wondering, why am I running? And also I questioned this mantra I talked about in the other video, I believe, where I thought that strength would lead to wisdom. So I was already questioning that from reading like Hawking's Letting Go book and Tolley's The Power Now book. But McKenna's book kind of really drove home kind of like that conception of, well, why am I doing this? It's kind of like there's no purpose. I'm doing it because there's a bunch of bundled shoulds. Like, I should run and work out because then I will get a stronger body and be more attractive, let's say, to the opposite sex. And I want a partner. Why do I want a partner? Because I'm lonely. Why am I lonely? Because I'm fearful. Why am I fearful? Because I'm afraid of non-existence. You see where that went? And let me connect the dots, because like to me, just finishing McKenna's book is very clear. But the curse of knowledge is very real, and so I'm going to try and be more thorough. So basically, I went from like strength, I need strength to get wisdom, to saying, well, that's kind of a load of crap and not necessarily true. The microfracture helped me get a very different perspective on life. And then basically went to questioning, well, why am I running? To, after reading Jed McKenna's book, being like, why am I doing anything? And then realizing, well, at least in terms of like working out, it could be, physical goals that are predicated on desires that are ultimately rooted in fear. Because Jed says a lot of human desire is rooted in fear. Because if you think about it, right, it's not a weird thing to say, I want a girlfriend, or I want sex, or all these things. There's pretty normal desires, I think most people would say. But where is it coming from? Because definitely before like the past month or two, a lot of my desires were coming from a place of neediness, a place of, I feel incomplete. Right now I feel complete as a potato. I'm like, man, that's a bad analogy. I don't know. As complete as a meal set. I should just stop with analogies at this. Basically, I'm okay. I'm okay right now with just about anything. Things in life are pretty good right now, so maybe I won't be okay in the future, but right now I'm okay. And the way I view it now, and I view like relationships now, is it'd be awesome to have one, potentially. Be great to have a romantic sexual partner, sure. But it's not all sunshine rainbows. There'd be the negatives and drawbacks of that too. And at the same time, one issue, and I've dealt with this through high school and college, but this gets into force and power. And I won't go too much further on this, but okay, this is probably enough for you see where you just ask yourself, who am I? And then you answer that question, right? You say like, who am I? I'm Trevor West. I'm 22 years old. I'm a male. I know Japanese, blah, blah. You can keep going. And like with the I know Japanese, what does knowing mean? And like, it's endless. And then I'm still doing this process. And so Jed calls it spiritual autolysis. And maybe I'm getting it a little wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's the main brunt of it. For example, like Descartes, the philosopher, would say, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. You can analyze this and you can say, what is this I? I think, therefore I am. What does it mean to be am? What is it? Am is like a state of existing, but like, what does that mean? And then what does think mean? What does think mean? Is thinking, does that include bodily sensations? So like if I'm hungry, does it include the sensation of hunger before it becomes a word in my mind that is hunger, that's associated with the feeling? Is that a thought? Is that what thinking is? Is sensing like, I like this person, before you think the words I like this person, whether it's romantic or just as a friend or whatever it is that a thought or is that an emotion? So you already see there's a greater complexity here to what is thinking to begin with. And a lot of people will say, well, it's this and that, but like through meditation also, you realize thoughts are like images. But most people think of thoughts as, it can be an image, but they also think of it as language. But then you say, what is language? And we say it's script. It's certain characters and symbols we use to represent different things. And so you get to the point where you say, well, what is language predicated on? Well, it's predicated on experience. If you tell someone who's colorblind, hey, is red, green, or blue colorblind, and you say, hey, this is the color red, they're like, wow, that's great. They won't be able to experience it. Or for example, someone who is born blind, would never really be able to know what different colors look like or what different things really look like. They have to rely on their other senses. So for those sorts of people and situations, it just shows how language only goes so far. It's always referential. And that's why when it comes to people like Jed McKenna and these other writers who are writing on these spiritual topics or enlightenment or truth, the material only goes as far as you have personal experience in your life, which is why going into the third point that I broke this down into is vastness and acceptance / non-resistance. So this is similar to what I touched on a bit in the letting go, but basically, so truth and enlightenment go beyond language and concepts. It's an open acceptance of what is. So a part of this is the spiritual autolysis process. It's just breaking things down until you Jed defines it very, very vividly. He says everyone has a sword and you cut your own head off with it. So he has very hardcore suicide analogies, because essentially you are killing yourself. You're killing the ego, which is basically as intense, and you need to want to be free of your ego, I guess, or to have enlightenment or truth as badly as it would take for you to kill yourself. Another good metaphor Jed gives at the end of the book. So he ends it, and then he gives another discussion he had with a student. And this student, he studied, and he's an intelligent man, and he's gone many places, had many wise teachers, and so he's asking Jed these interesting questions, but Jed notices this guy is just very cerebral, very intellectual, and he doesn't get it. He's trying to understand it from a rational mind view, right? A very rigid mind view, and it doesn't work because you cannot put the Tao or the way or whatever the hell it is, like the Tao and the way are even, you can't talk about it. So even calling it the Tao or the way or truth or enlightenment, it's not any of those things. Those are just signposts that point pretty close to whatever this thing is. But you can't define it. And a lot of people don't like that, especially the rational mind. The rational mind hates it. So basically, Jed's having this conversation with this guy, and he just says, okay, let me give you a little analogy. Because the way you can describe the undescribable is through metaphor and analogy. That's pretty much the best you can get in language, is you give signposts that point to signposts that are closer to the signposts that point to the signpost that points pretty close to truth. I think Jed also referenced, there was this Zen saying that do not look at the finger pointing at the finger at the moon, but look at the moon. So let's say I'm pointing at the door, and I have this finger pointing at this finger pointing at the door. Do not focus on either of my fingers. Focus on the door. It's a pretty good way of thinking about it, but that's how you think. That's how, not should, because you shouldn't get rid of shoulds. I guess if you want to obtain this enlightened state or get closer to truth, this is what you can do to get there. But there should be no shoulds. Oh, there we go. But everything's okay. Even saying that everything's not okay is okay. So this is where you get in the weird non-duality, where anything you do is fine because nothing cannot be not fine. It's once you sense it. I haven't fully sensed it, I think, as much as maybe someone like Jed or even some other people I've been talking with have, but I've sensed it to some degree, and it's just so liberating. But anyways, let's get to the analogy, okay? So Jed says this: you can either say this is you or this is just some guy. Anyways, there's this rich guy, or you're this rich guy or woman, whatever. You're on this 100th floor of this really big building in the city, and your business company owns the whole floor. You have this giant office, and you have a lot of money. You're very successful. You're happily married. You have kids. You have great friends. You have everything in life that you could want materially. And you decide, okay, I'm gonna go totally out. I'm gonna decorate this office. It's gonna be great. So you get the nicest carpets, you get these beautiful paintings, you get like these great windows, you get like everything like 30,000 kilometer long TV, like just unimaginable, just very exotic and crazy. Okay, so for the first few months or weeks or days, I'm going like down, years or months, whatever. Let's say it's been, so Jed says like, okay, whatever. It's been like 10 years, and now, even though you've been so satisfied with this room for those 10 years, it's been 10 years now, and now you're like, man, this room isn't so good. Why did I ever like this rug? Man, this painting's so fake, man. So superficial, man. These windows, man. So you or this person dedicates the next 3 to 5 years of their life going to classes, spending like 10 hours plus per week, learning architecture, learning all the ways, art, feng shui, how to arrange rooms, like to be as cool looking and as aesthetically appealing as possible. And after 5 years, you've made so many friends, your business has expanded, you're now making double the amount of money, like your relationship with your family and friends are even better now, and everyone, you're the life of the party, even though you weren't 5 years before, because now, you got, all these architecture things, and you're helping people out with their projects, and your life is so good, you're just vibrating with this positive energy, and you're so happy. That's what seeking spiritual enlightenment is like. That's the seeking. It's building up a completely irrelevant room. Not completely irrelevant, though. So Jed continues. You're in the same room, but the building is on fire. No one is coming to save you, and you're about to be incinerated to death. So the student at this point says, well, I would, I punch the windows, I get out through the window, because in this scenario, there is no way out of the room. You are trapped in the room. The only way out is technically through the window and a 100-story jump to a sidewalk and street. So basically, Jed allows, fine, this isn't Hollywood glass. You can't punch it. You're breaking your fists and your arms trying to freaking break this like real sturdy glass. But Jed allows, yes, fine. You can take a chair, and after a bit, you're able to break the window. So now the choice is, the fire is getting closer. And you feel the heat, and it's starting to burn your skin off. And Jed says, once you get to the point where the fire is so unpleasant that jumping out of that building is not even a question or a doubt. It is the obvious thing to do. It is natural to do. You have no resistance. You're just like, this is it. That's when you obtain enlightenment. That's when you obtain truth. That's when not obtain truth, because you cannot obtain that which does not exist. This is why it gets weird talking about this. But basically, you reach the state of what we would call understanding truth. Language is always going to fail. But anyways, you get enlightened, I guess, according to Jed. So that's the sort of level. And so I feel that quite strongly, because I think through the spiritual journey I guess I've been on so far, I have grown a lot. I went from being, I guess more self-centered in a negative way, like selfish in a like antisocial way, to being more pro-social, to being more open, to be more willing to try new things, to being more adventurous, to being more skillful, studying Japanese, picking up a new instrument, the shakuhachi, meditating, being calmer, being able to, all of these things. So far in my spiritual development, you could say psychological development, I have really grown as a person very considerably throughout the past few years. But that doesn't have anything to do with truth or enlightenment. And that's the point Jed wants to make. And that's the point I want to make, because it's one of the big points he makes in the book, is that a lot of people mix up the seeking of enlightenment, the seeking of truth, with the truth or with the enlightenment. Like, for example, I've meditated for a long time, but more recently I've meditated more consistently, kind of like in the past year or so I meditated more consistently. I haven't done it a lot super recently, but through that, I have obtained, states of consciousness where I do feel like the ego kind of subsides to some degree, and you feel connected with everything. And that's what some people call maybe unitary consciousness, one mind, God consciousness, whatever you want to call it. I don't really call it anything. It just is, right? Because it's like one of these, like, I think that, like, Taoism, that's why I think Taoism is pretty good in regards to this, because it tries to say as little as possible about things that you can't say anything about directly. So you can only describe this stuff indirectly through, like, negative statements. So in my own life, I got this sense, and this was like a month ago. This might have been actually before I started reading Jed. So I was already prepping, because I've been doing even more work in trying to reach a more enlightened state to obtain truth, whatever you want to call it. Obtain truth. See, that's a problematic. Just forgive my language uses. You get my intention, right? To understand truth, to at least get rid of the falseness in me, so that all that can remain is truth. Okay, if you want me to be more linguistically problematic. Oh my gosh, I've forgotten how to speak. That might be an accomplishment in regards to to truth, I guess. So about a month ago, I'm working and living in Japan, and I live and work on a small island in Japan, an island among islands. And there's a bridge in the town that I live in, and it's a beautiful bridge, and I've gotten, like, great pictures of it when the moon's out, but that's regardless of the point. I went running there or walking there or whatever, but I felt like this is where I got to go. So I went there, right? And I looked over the edge, and I felt such an intense fear. There was this tangible fear that just gripped me. And it was a fear because I knew I could jump. It wasn't like, most people walk over bridges or other things, or, all these things, and they think, oh, I would never jump. No. I was reaching, like, these states of letting go, of resistance to things. So I would, like, at this point, I either finished completely or had finished a lot of David Hawking's Letting Go book. And at this point, some of my resistances to, like, dying were being lessened, but obviously not completely, because I still had fear. I guess if now I did it, I would look over the bridge and, in theory, be willing to jump, but not feel fear, or at least not feel as much fear. But yeah, there was so much fear because there was a sense in me that I could do it, that I could jump, and I would probably die or get really injured. So I mean, the fear was obviously from the future consequence. But just this state of freedom, of this sort of very extreme freedom. Obviously, in this case, it's the freedom to do something very physically harmful to oneself. But more recently, and it was also like the freedom, I was holding on to my phone, and I was really considering, like, I could just chuck my phone into the ocean right now. I could just chuck it right now. I kind of had to hold myself back, because I was almost tempted by this newfound freedom of just, like, wow, I can do this, But more recently, this is after reading Jed McKenna's book, like the past couple days, I've traveled to Osaka. Now I'm near Kyoto for work, for interpretation translation course. But while here, it's been, like, really cool. Like, what is it like? It's like I'm at this level where, like, no matter what happens, and maybe if something terrible enough comes up, my ego's just going to go bloop and it'll come back. But at least so far, it's been like, well, even if I don't pass this course, even if I'm really late for something, even if someone steals my wallet, if someone steals my phone, someone steals my computer, anything I own, no matter what happens, it's fine. Like there's just such a relief. And sort of course, Hawking says this, and I want to keep this focus on Jed. But Jed, I think, punches through so much falseness I would really recommend, if you're interested in this sort of stuff, to read his book. It is so good. I mean, even from the beginning, let me give you a little taste. I'm not going to read a quote. I'm just going to recall from my mind. So he's talking with that one girl, right, that I was talking about earlier. And he says, do you know the Bhagavad Gita, right? The story between Arjuna and Krishna, right? Who's disguised himself as, I don't know if he's called Krishna, but he's disguised in a more mortal form. And Arjuna is betwixt. He has to choose whether to fight part of his family that's sort of rebelling or something, or not fight and let his family kill each other. And so this gets into the question of right actions and sort of beyond morality, not, because no matter what Arjuna did, you could say it's sort of like good, bad. It's sort of like the situation he was in was so complex. Kind of went beyond that. It was sort of like, I guess, a sense of duty, but right action, yeah. And the concept, I'm not going to go into that concept. Just within that, Jed mentions that Arjuna, obviously at some point in the Gita, sees Krishna's horrid and splendid, magnificent, fear-invoking form that has 1,000,000 eyes or 1,000 eyes and 1,000 arms and 1,000 legs, 1,000 feet. Just this ego-shattering manifestation of the infinite, creative, destructive force in the universe, in all of existence, right? And you're looking at this as this puny and pathetic human who is just grasping onto your little ego strands, and it would probably break anyone. So so what Jed says is that he said it in such a funny way. He's like, Arjuna didn't just wake up this morning, in the Gita, and he's like, I'm going to be enlightened. No, he got hit. And Jed was like, it's like getting hit by a bus. So yeah, that's where I'll end it. Those are the 3 points. I'll read them again, and I'll post this in the description, like I'm going to do with all my videos, because to be honest, I would never want to listen to myself talk on these things for this long. We're already I'm already 32 minutes in. Yeah, so if you just read the spark notes, that's fine. But yeah, the 3 points: truth and enlightenment as unspeakable, only describable in negative terms, and you obtain truth/enlightenment by getting rid of all the falseness, the ego in you. 2, most spiritual seekers are not trying to reach a state of enlightenment or truth, but rather they're just seeking to seek, because that's what gives their life meaning and purpose and value, which Jed said isn't a bad thing. And in the non-dualistic perspective, there technically isn't anything that's bad. It's just, the fact is you will not reach truth. You will not reach enlightenment, according to Jed. I mean, if I was in this, like the same enlightened state as Jed was, I could say confidently, I'm sort of second-handing this. Some things that Jed describes, I do have personal experience with. Like I can say, yes, probably the truth and enlightenment seem to be not describable directly, and I do have more sympathy towards a non-dualistic way of viewing these things, but I'm not there yet, I guess. At least not like Jed. But I think maybe okay. And then the 3rd point is vastness and acceptance/non-resistance. So this is just the general idea that once you open kind of like Pandora's box, and you realize, well, nothing really means anything in one sense, but in another paradoxical non-dualistic sense, everything means everything, or anything can mean anything. But basically, and this is, I'll just jump into now for the questions and criticisms. So I don't know if Jed just does this because he meant this book to just be very provocative and just, like with me, really get me thinking, because I'll finish out the 2 main points that Jed makes before I go into Q&A. Who am I? Is the question you ask yourself, and just with that question you can obtain enlightenment, according to Jed. The second thing is, it goes along with this, but you have to search for the truth yourself, and by yourself, only for yourself. So just search the truth for yourself. And that goes along with who am I, asking yourself that. You have to be the one. No one else can do it for you, because Jed says, well, there is only one truth. it's unitary, at least that's how he describes it. Technically, it, non-dualistically, maybe it wouldn't be, but this is a language issue, whatever. The only way you can understand truth or obtain enlightenment, reach an enlightened state, is by personally doing this stuff. You can't just, just because I've read Jed's book, and if he is an enlightened person and he does know the truth, just because I'm quoting him or talking about his ideas here, doesn't mean I'm enlightened or I know the truth. You see what I mean? Anyone could read enlightened things, just like I could probably read the English written in a super crazy advanced like rocket book on like the science of rockets. Be like, I don't understand this at all, right? Because there's a difference between like, I don't know how to describe it. Like, like there's like when you're teaching, right? There's like a book that goes over, or when you're learning like a language or anything, there's like a thing that it is explained in such a way to teach you. And then after that, there are other texts that are, like, for example, like I know Japanese, right? So like here's some Japanese right here, right? So you have some Japanese. If you don't know Japanese, you cannot read it. But once you know Japanese, you have access to everything everyone's ever written in Japanese, and you can read and understand it. So it's not meaningless. It's meaningful in a relative context. So in that sense, the process of enlightenment seems to be similar to this. You need to literally cultivate yourself in this sense. And Jed says you can do it through spiritual autolysis, which is basically, the answering, who am I? And just really answering these questions till you break down all the falseness in you. But yeah, that is spiritual enlightenment, the damnedest thing. So final thoughts and questions. So one question, is Jed done? Are you done, Jed? Because he says he's done. He's done the work. Because he says throughout the book that one thing that drove him to getting to this enlightened state of knowing truth was one word, really, like his mantra, further. And so he said he reached certain stages where he thought he was done. He thought, oh, I'm enlightened now. But then he said, no, further. So he kept going, and he kept going, and he kept going, and he kept going. In the book, though, he says many times that I am enlightened. I know the truth. Pretty much no one on earth is enlightened or know the truth. At most, it's in the tens. There's maybe 10 to 30 people on the earth right now who are enlightened, and only so many hundred or thousand who have been enlightened throughout humanity's lifespan, right, of existing. So there's 2 points on that. One, I guess if Jed really is enlightened and really does know the truth, which you definitely can sense that he is, like he's in the right place, like he is very wise. That I think that is undeniable. But what is it like? I feel like until probably until I myself become enlightened, know the truth, you can't really know for sure whether someone is sort of like is or isn't. And Jed even makes this point that only like awake people can sense other awake people, and they can sense asleep people like that. Like, so it could just be I'm still asleep and maybe I'm starting to wake up, and then maybe I'm like, oh yeah, Jed's the man. But for right now, maybe just because of my ignorance and because I haven't met him, I've just read the book. So like sometimes he writes in paradoxical language because that's the dilemma you get when trying to describe the indescribable in language. So yeah, I'm not criticizing Jed for that, but it seems like there's no way to know for sure if Jed's true. But that's why Jed keeps saying, well, do it yourself. You got to do the work yourself. Do not just read my book. This isn't going to get you anywhere. In fact, he's like, you don't even need to read my book. If you're just doing stuff, you don't need to read books. You don't need to meditate. You don't need to do psychedelics. You don't need to do yoga. You don't need to do anything. And I didn't mention this, but in the other video, in David Hawkins' Letting Go book, he literally talks for like 5 to 15 minutes listing everything. Spiritual or new agey or old spiritual, religious rituals, everything. He literally lists, it must be like, I don't know how it's written in the book, I listen to an audiobook, it must be like a few pages of him just writing everything. And he says, oh, so you've said you've done all these spiritual things and you're still not satisfied or whatever. So like Jed and him and other people seem to be on a similar wavelength. So I don't doubt that. I've just always been skeptical of claims of objective knowledge, of absolute knowledge, what that even means. All I know is that at least in terms of personal meaning in life, it seems like he knows the truth or is enlightened, at least to the point where, like, for example, you say, and this is similar to the spiritual autolysis, right? So you could start out with, who am I, right? I'm Trevor West. I'm 22 years old. I like this, and, I'm a coordinator for international relations for my job. I translate and interpret Japanese. And I like it, I would like to do that. And then maybe the question is, what's a job? Or, you could get to the epistemology and like what words mean, but let's do a more pragmatic question. Why do you like, this is me asking third person now. Why do you like working as a coordinator for international relations? Why do you like translating Japanese English? I could be like, well, it's interesting work. It's decent pay. And you just be like, well, why, what's this pay? Why do you need pay? It's like, well, it's money. I need it to live and all this thing. I don't know. I was trying to be clever. Basically, I'm trying to get to the root. I did this with another example, not in this video, sorry. Thoughts aren't always smooth, you know what I mean? Sometimes they're like, but basically underlying the basic assumptions of life. And this is one thing that I was just thinking today and early in the morning and last night after I finished the book, is the big meaning of life. So this is from like the more materialistic paradigm. Right, think about that really rich businessman living on the 100th floor of that business. He owns a giant business that keeps growing. He, has a great family, wife, kids, blah, 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 blah. The list goes on. Almost perfect life in a materialistic sense. But what's next? So you get all this money. You get a wife. You have a great job that's interesting, pays well. Then you're going to die. So maybe your view is, it's a hedonistic view. That's what it ultimately comes down to. Because I was going to say, people say, well, what do you want to do in life? Well, I want to get a job that I kind of like and that pays okay, or I want to get a job that pays a lot so I can buy, cars, attract a mate, blah, 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 material things, right? Okay. And then the question goes, and then it keeps going on, but you realize, the problem with hedonism is that everything is ephemeral and you will lose everything. But you could still be a hedonist who says, well, I know everything's not going to last, but I'm going to live it up. I'm going to live it up while I'm alive. And that is, I think, technically there is no invalid point. There's nothing wrong. And in fact, I think I might still hold on to that belief a bit. And this is what I found out. But it's important to make this conscious because there's a choice to be made here. So you could say, well, I'm going to live it out. I'm going to enjoy my life as much as I can, make as much money as I can, enjoy this emotional joy ride, even if it is all illusion or mostly illusion or blah, blah, but whatever, man. I'm having a good time. I'm having a good trip. And even though I'm not admitting it consciously to myself, I really do enjoy those negative feelings that make me feel alive. You know what I mean? At least that happens on some degree. And I don't know. I think a conscious hedonism is possible because here's the point you get to. You get to a point, and Jed even said, if people knew what enlightenment or the truth contained, some people might turn away from the path because they might not find it worth it. Or Jed says this is one reason why some people never obtain truth or enlightenment, but they stay on the path to truth and enlightenment, but will never get there because they don't want to get there because their goal isn't to reach enlightenment or understand truth, but is rather to just walk on a path that is not really ever going to head to enlightenment or truth, but really just provides a sense of solidarity, identity, and a means of diligence and a way of bettering yourself and making your life and the life of those around you better. That sounds pretty good, right? So the real dilemma here then comes to this. We're going to die someday. And so everything that's fun will come to an end. So here's one thing. If you're like a more rational or whatever hedonist, and you're like, well, I accept that. Like, I'm going to enjoy this while it lasts. So the only real counterpoint I can think of right now to why you would not choose, let's just live up this life while you can, is that you want to know the truth. And you say, well, why would I rather know the truth or be enlightened than enjoy this life of pleasure? Well, because oh man, no, I got to get the quote. But let me just say, I'm pretty. No, I don't need to get the quote. There's nothing I need to. I remember it from my mind, but Jed quotes this one. Is it the Gita or it's something? Maybe it's a Hindu writing, but it's basically, or it's this one really cool dude. It was like, I want to know the truth because it never ends, right? It's this subsisting. It is subsistent. It will not end. It is infinite. And so this is where I've come to, where pleasure is great, but this life is going to end, and that's fine. But I feel like, wouldn't it be cool to know the truth? Because I've already noticed, like, and here's one thing I can say, is the truth seems to probably offer the greatest peace that you can ever obtain. Because if you get closer to this state, or you are in this state, you're okay with no matter what happens. And this is something I was considering on a practical level. So like with the economic thing, like, well, someone wants money so that they can have a place, have food, shelter, attract a mate, all these things, which are good things. But you say, well, what are you staving off? Well, you're staving off starvation. You're staving off homelessness. Why? Because it's better generally. It's usually agreed upon. People like to feel better than to not feel good, right? People don't like to feel suffering. But you could say, well, what if you're okay with that suffering? Then let's say your house burns down, or someone robs you and steals everything you own, or let's just say everything you own is gone, and like everything's breaking down around you, and everything you knew is a lie, and all this. Most people would have a mental breakdown and just collapse and be like, well, what was I spending my whole life doing? And it's like, well, exactly. You were spending it doing nothing, which is fine. You know, it's perfectly fine. I mean, you're going to become dust just like me someday, which is cool. You know, we'll be dust buddies someday. I guess it's sort of this perspective, but I know individuals like Jordan Peterson would say, because nihilism is similar in saying, well, why does it matter? We're all going to die someday. I'm just going to do wherever the hell I want. See, that is a problem because, and this is one point I will bring up about Jed that is a potential criticism, but who knows? Basically, nihilism, the main root of the issue with nihilism is that it's still predicated in a dualistic framework. So it's still predicated on ego. So the problem is by saying nothing means anything, which is true in a non-dualistic sense, even though technically things mean nothing and they mean everything. Nihilism gets it wrong because the individual who is making the nihilistic claim, maybe if you are making a nihilistic claim, even though nihilism technically isn't wrong because nothing can be wrong. So it's predicated on falseness, right? The ego. So instead of dealing with, because right now I feel like I'm coming from a place of probably still some ego, but definitely the least amount I've had in all of my life, I believe. But basically, the nihilist, or whatever, the atheist nihilist, they are projecting anger or sadness or whatever and saying, oh, what does it matter? So I'll just do whatever I like doing. I'll pleasure myself while I can because nothing really matters. So I'm going to rape women and do whatever I want, right? So it gives a sort of moral justification for, well, within a dualistic paradigm, morally reprehensible acts as deemed by a lot of cultures today. So basically, it's just an excuse for the ego to expand its feeling of comfortableness in doing sort of selfish actions. Which, yeah, I mean, that's a weird thing. I'm at this point where it's like, yeah, the me from the past would have been that's bad. And there's even this case, I'll give it now, where there's this Japanese guy who went to like Switzerland or something, some European country, And he literally he date raped this girl and like roofied her, and then he literally killed and ate her, and then he like got tried in Paris or something, and they're like, yeah, you're going to jail for the rest of your life. But instead of jail, they put him in like a mental asylum or something, or a mental hospital or mental prison institution. And Japan was like, we'd like our guy back. We'd like our citizen back, thank you. And so France, being really stupid, just gave him back. And Japan, as you know, has perfect psychological services. Perfect. But this is like 50 years ago, so like, this is woo. I'll leave it up to you to make up your mind, but they decide to release a murderer and cannibal just into society because they found he had no mental issues. He was perfectly sane. And this guy is openly posting on social media now like, hey, yeah, I ate that girl and I got away with it. And even now, I can feel my ego churning a bit. I can feel it. But there's this bigger space. I was so pissed when my friend told me about this. Like, I almost went on a crusade. Like, I'm going to find this guy and I'm going to kill him. I mean, I'm in Japan now. But no, because it just seemed like, yeah. And I was like, well, why don't vigilantes exist? You know, because he got out of it because of some weird loophole where, like, he killed someone, but he was classified as criminally insane. So instead of going to a prison, he went to a mental asylum, and then he got deported back to Japan, which put him in a mental asylum. But then they determined there he wasn't insane, so they let him free even though he killed someone under the premise of mental insanity, but determined later he wasn't insane, and so technically he should have been guilty of the crime, but because of the weird, like, inability to retry people and stuff. Yeah, you see where there's weird loopholes like this where literally this guy killed someone and ate them and he wasn't punished, really. I mean, yeah, a couple years in an asylum or something probably wasn't a peachy time. But yeah, I guess the me right now would say, yeah, I guess that's fine. Like in this non-dualistic perspective, the ego in me is sort of being like, yeah, if I see this guy in the street and he's like, yo, I killed this person and got away with it, I'd probably beat the living shit out of him. At least that's what my ego sort of wants to do. Because, so, no, but that's what I'm saying. Isn't that interesting? So it's like, even with this very visceral, very real situation, I got so angry when my friend told me this a few months ago. Because it's one of those, I still think it's sad. It's kind of disappointing. But it's like, it's not... It just shows the strangeness of life and also the general BS of society, because if you find the right loophole, you can literally kill people, and I guess no one cares. No one's like, oh, maybe nowadays, but it's weird because he's posting on social media, right? Like, can you imagine? Like, is it just Japan? Like, no one cares? Because I feel like if it was the U.S., there would actually be people who would probably go kill him or beat him up, or at least they would be like, oh yeah, he lives in this town, like, let's go annoy him or something. Like, there's people in the U.S. who like literally beat up other people and annoy other people for like nothing. They're like, oh, you said white people matter. I'm gonna go beat you up now. It's like, everyone matters, dude. It's like it's like, chill. Like, there's like a guy in Japan walking around who literally killed and ate someone, and like no one cares. So yeah, that's one thing. I guess you realize the general insanity of things, and that's the thing. If you want to play the insane game, well, you just better get ready to go on the ups and downs of everything. But yeah, that's one of the benefits, I think, of seeking out and actually trying to obtain, and maybe obtaining enlightenment or an understanding of truth, is this freedom from the insanity, in that you take a perspective that at least seems longer or more true in a, what do you say, eternal sense. At the very least, it explains. It doesn't explain. See, that's why it works. The reason why all religions fail is that they try to explain what cannot be explained with words. what the Taoists got right is, yeah, and I would say like Maimonides. This is getting into philosophy. I should end this before I get into Maimonides and negative theology. This is already an hour. This is already too long. I apologize. But I was, yeah, rest to say, Jed has a lot to offer. So, yeah, this gets to the other point. And I kind of did a personal example here. I mean, I think maybe you noticed, did I get like a little more agitated or noticeably slightly angry when I was talking about the murder cannibal who's walking around Japan? But the one last thing. Okay, so Jed said he obtained truth, obtained enlightenment. Once you understand truth, once you obtain enlightenment, is it something that can be lost? Is it something that fluctuates? Is it, oh, you're in an enlightened state for 5 minutes and then, someone punches you in the face and you're like, oh, you just tank and you lose that state of enlightenment. And, like returning mind, like Taoism. Tao is, it's the art of returning, right? And meditation's the same, monkey mind. Even the master mind wanders. Everyone minds wander. You can't, that's just kind of like a built-in function, it seems. So it seems like Jed, does say he fluctuates between states because he's still a human, he still has an ego. And maybe it's just as you get more space, you are less affected. Like someone, this one friend, teacher, gave this analogy where it's like the ego, most people's egos, and people who haven't really thought about life and why do you exist? What do you want to do in life? What is life? Who am I? All these big questions that really I think are the bedrock of probably living a at least meaningful life, or at least a life that has some pizzazz and isn't just, blindly following whatever one's culture prescribes and parents, etc., prescribe. Most people's ego, if you compare existence to like an ocean, most people's egos are right on top of the ocean, right where the waves and the crests are always crashing down and going back and forth and back and forth. And so for most people, and myself included, I think I'm getting more away from this now, but they're very close on the top. So you're a lot of people. It's weird now because it doesn't seem like it's possible. Now I'm reaching these states, this curse of knowledge, I'm forgetting what it is like to not be here. And that's just maybe the nature of it. But so you're kind of in the waves of life. You're kind of completely identified with the crashing of the waves. So when you're having a good time, then you are completely identified with that good time. And as soon as you have a bad time, you're completely identified with that bad time. So like, for example, but let me complete. So once you start on the path of enlightenment or becoming more enlightened, it's like you never get out of the ocean because you can't. That's just sort of like existence. Maybe you could. For the sake of this analogy, you cannot. But basically, you get further away from the surface of the ocean and you get deeper down. So there's still currents and tides down below the surface, and some of them might be more violent than on the top. But let's just say once you get deep enough, you're generally not affected by the ups and downs of the ocean, but you can still see it. You can still see, oh yeah, there's like a little tide there, there's a little... So you can still sense your ego, but there's greater space. So like I noticed, like, when I was talking about like the cannibal murderer guy, like in the past, I probably would have gotten really angry because I was identified with, well, that's not right. That's injustice, and injustice shouldn't exist. But shoulds shouldn't exist. I'm sorry, I like that one. But basically, yeah, that's basically the state. So let me give an example. So a few weeks ago, I drank a little bit of alcohol and danced a little bit and ate food when I shouldn't have, and I was puking in a bathroom, in the toilet, and then left wherever I was, and then I was puking outside the ramen I just ate earlier, which was not a good idea to eat, and it was weird. Maybe it's because I was drunk, and drunkenness affects you, but there was a sense of like, yeah, it was unpleasant, but I was separate. And I feel this more and more. It's not that my ego is gone. It is that there's a space that has been opened, and it's really cool. So, right, we're going to top this out an hour. It's way too long. I'm definitely putting the points in the description. Yeah, that is Jed McKenna's Spiritual Enlightenment, the Damnedest Thing. I probably will break this down. I don't know if I'll just cut up this video. I will upload this full thing for ye brave souls who are willing to listen to this. Thank you. I don't think I would put up with myself for an hour. I'm not really sure. Hopefully you got something out of this. If you have any questions or comments, well, comment, I guess. Like and subscribe. You don't have to. Just whatever floats your boat. Yeah. I'll see you next time. Peace.